Hello and welcome to a very special edition of View from the Bridge. Something a little bit different for you today. I'm joined by award-winning sports writer Duncan Hamilton, who's written books on Harold Larwood, Brian Clough, and many other football and cricket books, which I hope you get a chance to speak to him about. And even, more excitingly, has one coming out later this summer about Sir Garfield Sobers. Again, one we'll delve into. Duncan, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks. Enjoying the summer, and hoping at some point to be able to go and watch some cricket at Trent Bridge.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess you're probably keeping half an eye or more on how not to do. Obviously, big game coming up tomorrow, actually, isn't it, against Surrey? But that's quite exciting
Yeah,
one to look forward to.
yes. I mean, I've been watching Notts now since the late 1960s. So I mean, I'm never not looking at the cricket scores. In fact, I often think when people say, "Oh, that my computer might get hacked," I mean, they will find nothing apart from me looking at the BBC Sports um, pages for either cricket or football. Um, I mean, they'll be terribly bored, I think.
Um, it's something I remember when I was at school and I used to, read obviously phones then, you'd always be checking the scores on my phone during lessons. So I know the feeling. You almost can't stop yourself, can you? You always need to know what's going on and how your team's doing. It's one of those things with the sports fan, isn't it? I suppose.
Well, I remember one of the great revolutionary things during my early kind of adulthood was the invention of CFAX. CFAX, which now seems as long ago as the steam engine, but at the time was absolutely revolutionary that you could actually get the football and the cricket scores live, or I think they were updated every 5 or 10 minutes because they came from the Press Association service, and it was just an absolute miracle. Whereas now we just take it for granted.
I know, and
You can get anything on the internet.
well, you don't even need to be local to watch these days. You can watch on YouTube, can't you? You can watch
Oh,
all
it's
the.
wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
It's no, it's been we're very lucky with that. So I know I don't know how I'd be able to watch Notts without it. So I'm really grateful for that. And obviously, you mentioned you've been a supporter since the '60s. That's kind of the reason behind your latest book on Sobers, isn't it? Which is I think coming out in a month or two, is it?
It's coming out. I think it's on the 2nd of July. And yes, it is. You will kind of notice, I suppose, despite the fact that I live in Yorkshire, um, lots of my books are set in Nottingham. So Brian Clough, obviously, Harold Larwood, and I was supposed to write a book on Gary Sobers 20 years ago. After when I signed the contract to write Harold Larwood, I also agreed to do Gary Sobers. And then by the time I got to the end of Harold Larwood, I thought to myself, well, I don't really want to do another biography yet. I want to do something different. And I'd kind of had this idea of spending a summer just going around and watching cricket and kind of trying to make sense of it. And so I did that instead. And then another book came up, and then another book came up, and then a third and a fourth and a fifth. And I only really decided to kind of write Gary Sobers, which is a book about Nottingham as much as it is about Gary Sobers. In 2023, when I'd wanted to do one thing, but I wasn't very well, um, and there wasn't much I could do for kind of 2 or 3 months. And I suddenly thought to myself, well, if I don't start to write Gary Sobers now, I'll probably never write it.
Mm.
So I sat down and began to kind of sketch it out and decide what was going to go in it and what wasn't going to go in it and whether I should go here or there. And I thought, well, this is actually a book about Nottingham as much as anything else. It's a book about how the city has changed since the 1960s and the Nottingham in which I kind of grew up. And when I come back to Nottingham, how does it feel now? And so there's kind of a lot of me in that book, I suppose.
Oh, that's interesting. When you decide to write, a biography like that, how do you kind of get your head around planning it all? Because it's not just a case of I want to write about Gary Sobers, left to thrive out. And imagine the research involved, planning each chapter, where you get your information from, and also, do you approach him directly and see if he wants to speak to you? How does
No,
that?
I didn't. I didn't approach him. I didn't approach him because he's about to become 90 years old, but also B, it was really more about what I thought about Gary Sobers and my memories of Gary Sobers, because it actually, I mean, the book essentially does begin and covers his career, but generally speaking, it ends in around 1976 when he got his knighthood. So I wasn't too interested about what had happened subsequently, because I wanted to kind of capture the way that what Sobers kind of did, what he did to the city. I mean, Nottingham in the 1960s, when he came here, was still, it was still Boots, and it was still the Raleigh bicycle factory, the and obviously Players cigarettes. The football team had a really good season, obviously in 67, which is Forest, I think. Did they finish second or third in the table, and they got to the semi-finals of the FA Cup? But they were then going to go into a sharp decline. And if you did think about Nottingham, it was normally because of the 1950s TV series, which ITV seemed to run on a perpetual loop. And I talk about this in the Sobers book. And it was this kind of image of Robin Hood, and Robin Hood in the kind of ITV series, which was actually made in Cricklewood, I think, rather than Sherwood Forest. It was about a very suave Robin Hood. I said that he could be, I mean, he could have been a sort of 007, really, and made Marion sound as if she'd been to RADA and a kind of Swiss finishing school. So he gave an identity to Nottingham Sobers because people wanted to come and see him, and because he was just magnetic, absolutely magnetic. I mean, I cannot, and I just, as I'm talking about it, I can see it. I can see him come down those pavilion steps. I can see him open the gate. I can see him walk across the turf. And he had such a swagger about him, and he had a glow. It must have been identifiable from the moon. He was just star quality, and he had this uncanny grace. I mean, I don't think that he did anything clumsily. Everything was done with a beautiful poise, and he could do everything. He could bat, he could bowl, he could field in the slips and make the most remarkable catches. And I think it was back in the early 2000s. I went to a test match at Trent Bridge against Australia, when Shane Warne took a lot of wickets, and I was in a box with Derek Murray, and Derek Murray, who was the kind of wicketkeeper during Sobers' era, and then again during the Clive Lloyd era, and he said that Sobers would have been a first-class wicketkeeper too. So there was nothing he couldn't do.
No, because you say he bowled everything, didn't he? And he fielded everywhere. He fields around the bat. As you say, he was the ultimate all-rounder. And when he came to Notts, that was 1968. That was a time when the restrictions on overseas players was being lifted. And Notts weren't a very successful team at that time. So to have him come must have been like tremendously exciting. Back then.
Oh, it was absolute. I mean, it was absolute Hollywood. It was just like having a Hollywood film star. And there is a little bit of film which you can see, I think, if you go onto YouTube, or of him turning up on his first day, and it's freezing cold, and he goes out to the nets and he's wrapped in a sheepskin coat, and you think, how, he's. I think it's going to be one of those things. You thought, why do I need another full kind of season in England? Because he'd previously been playing in both the Lancashire leagues and the Staffordshire League, and there was a very blinkered view then, well, up until 1967, about whether or not overseas players should be admitted to the county championship. But the problem was that the county championship was absolutely moribund. There were very few people watching it. I found a great quote from Ted Dexter, who was obviously still then Sussex and possibly still Sussex captain. And he said, that they would travel hundreds of miles to go and play a county game. They would go back to Sussex. They would play a county game there. Nobody was watching up in kind of Lancashire. Nobody was watching down in Sussex. And he felt as if he was wasting his time. And it was only when the overseas players came in that it just gave them people an kind of extra incentive to kind of go and watch. And I can always remember at Trent Bridge, I don't know whether there was a Morse code system or a flying pigeon or something, but almost from the moment that Sobers came into bat, for example, suddenly you would get an extra 500 people inside the ground. I don't know where they came from, but suddenly they just turned up. I mean, it must have been a sixth sense or something.
Absolutely, no, and he was made captain in his first year. I mean, and that time he was in his prime as well. He wasn't like he was a young, unknown player, or he was someone on the way down. He still had a good number of years ahead of him. He was in good form, wasn't he? So, and and he performed well for Notts. I think as well. He was a great player for Notts. And I guess everyone remembers the Sixers in his first season, but he did come. He performed well, didn't he?
He did, and he got Nottinghamshire into the top four, and he took spectacular wickets. He made a fantastic century or two. Certainly one at Kent, and I think another one at Middlesex. And Notts were paying him about £5,000 a year, which was an absolutely fabulous sum of money then. Obviously, it seems very kind of trifling now, but because of the crowds that came to, I think, his first couple of games, I think they paid half of that salary, or they recouped half his salary before the end of May.
Interesting. Reminds me of the time they signed Sher Bakhter in 2000, and he was on a big contract, and they said the membership figures had gone through the roof. Obviously, Sher never ended up playing because of injury, but it shows you what when you get a star overseas player, what it can do, doesn't it? That buzz of excitement.
Yeah, it was kind of just a great pity that he couldn't actually play for Notts because of his injury.
Yeah. But, I mean, it must have been thrilling. Is there one Sobers moment that stands out for you the most? In this time when you watched him.
Well, there was kind of honestly 1-6 that I saw him hit, which I'm sure it was against Surrey, and he was batting at the pavilion end, and the ball hit the sight screen at the Radcliffe Road end with such a thump that it came back to the bowler's feet. It was just amazing, and it was just. I mean, but also I was very lucky, and he came to the village I was living in, which was Keyworth, I think it was 1971, and he was injured, I think, at the end of the season, and he'd agreed to face some of the locals on the cricket pitch, and of course Keyworth, or the half of Keyworth that I was from, was very kind of mining, so there were these big kind of burly sort of lads waiting to kind of bowl as fast as they could at Sobers, and he was late, and he came across with Joe Hardstaff Jr. and they'd been to the pub, and I thought he would come out in his whites. And he was in a suit. He was in an immaculate suit. I mean, he was always dressed beautifully. I mean, he could have been a model on the kind of front of a kind of men's sort of Vogue or something like that, or kind of GQ had it existed then. And he came out, and someone gave him a bat, and he took guard. Well, he didn't take guard. He just actually stood in front of the stumps, and he wasn't wearing any pads, and he wasn't wearing any gloves. He had no protection of any kind, and people were flinging kind of balls at him, and he was just playing them ever so gently across, just putting them exactly where he wanted. And then he played a shot that I'd never seen before, because I'd started watching him probably about mid-off, and then I moved around towards the leg side, and he played what is now a kind of common shot where he just bent his knees and he took the bat behind his legs and he smacked it hard, and the ball whistled about 5 inches past my ankle, and he went and it went through the metal fence and probably down the road. And whether that ball has ever been found, I have no idea. But I mean, he did that for about 20, 25 minutes, and nobody could get a ball past him. Nobody could touch him.
Amazing. Wow. Those are the sort of things that stay with you. I still remember seeing Shane Warne having a net while he was at Hampshire, and he's playing Notts, and I think it was the lunch break or the tea break, and he was just he was even just a bat, but he was on, they're on the outfield, and there's a kid out there watching you, and those things stand with you forever, don't they, in your memory. And there's moments, don't they, that star power is just incredible to hear. And I imagine,
can tell you.
Yep. So.
Well, sorry, I was going to say, I can tell you. 10 years ago, I covered the last match of the summer, which was going to decide the county championship between Middlesex and Yorkshire.
Yeah.
And it ended in a run chase. So basically a kind of 4-day game ended like a 40-over Sunday, old-fashioned Sunday bash. And I kind of left my seat in the Compton stand, in the upper tier of the Compton stand, and I went to the gents. And as I passed the gents, I kind of looked across at the nets. And I thought, it's kind of one of those moments where your eyes are confirming what you're seeing, but your kind of brain won't accept it. And Shane Warne was actually bowling in the nets. And he was doing a coaching clinic for a Derbyshire bowler. And so I stood and watched him. And then another 20-odd people came and kind of watched him. And then another 100 people came. And then another 50 people came. And after half an hour, there must have been probably 1,000 people standing alongside the net, just actually watching Shane Warne bowl while the Middlesex Yorkshire game was actually going on, because you could get so close to actually watching him bowl.
That's amazing. I mean, I think I saw him play for. You said you obviously saw him at Trent Bridge in, I think, 01. I was lucky to see him there in 05,
yeah.
And he nearly won it on the final day, obviously the fourth day. But yeah, he was just incredible. And that match as well. I mean, that wasn't a bad finish either. That was the Roland Jones hat trick, was it, to Middlesex? I think that.
Yes, it was. Yeah, I mean, I actually did a very small book about it, which I actually published with a friend of mine, and it's only 25,000 words long, and it's called The Kings of Summer. And it took 6 weeks to write, but I was really pleased that I actually wrote it, because I remember the game quite distinctly, because on the Thursday the weather was so miserable and Yorkshire had to hang on. There was a last wicket pair to kind of try and make sure that the game would go into a final kind of day, really. And then on the Friday, it was absolutely gorgeous. It was like high summer, and it was the last Friday in September, but it was almost like July. And so to have seen such a wonderful finish, but also to have seen Shane Warne bowl on the same day when he wasn't supposed to be there and nobody knew he was going to be there, was absolutely fantastic. I felt very, very privileged.
Brilliant. I think that was the game as well. If it was a draw, I think Somerset would have won, wasn't it?
That's right, yes.
Yeah. One of the better final days.
Yeah.
And just a final question on Sobers before we move on. What was it like when you I know a lot of it was memory, but obviously you would have researched it a lot as well. What was that like for you, sort of reliving that? I mean, that must have been quite exciting, I imagine, sort of delving back into the archives and, seeing all of that.
Yeah, it was. I mean, one of the things that I did watch, and you can actually, you can pick it up very, very, very easily on YouTube, is the century that he scored in Melbourne for the rest of the world, and it's a half-hour program, and this is what used to happen back in the 1970s, because it was never shown on either Grandstand, which was obviously the Saturday afternoon sports program, or Sports Night with Coleman, which used to appear on Wednesday nights. Keyworth Cricket Club managed to get hold of a film which came from, which I think Notts managed to get hold of, which was this half-hour package of highlights of Sobers batting against Lilly and literally tearing him around the entire ground. And Don Bradman did the introduction. And I mean, he's never going to be a TV presenter, but he was just in kind of total awe of Sobers's kind of skill, and saying these are shots that you'll never see the like of again, and you'll never see the like of this innings again. And of course now, thanks to YouTube, that wonderful invention, you can switch it on and kind of watch it. And I think it would kind of just give people an idea. I think it's of what Sobers was like, because I think it's always very difficult for any generation who didn't see someone play to kind of take the word of the generation who did, because there are usually, oh goodness, he was wonderful and he was wonderful, but they haven't got anybody to actually measure him against, and so they would have to see it from their own eyes. And that's one of the closest things that you get, because county cricket wasn't covered on TV. The only county match that appeared in TV in the 60s and 70s was the Roses match, which was often shown on Yorkshire TV. But other than that, you saw the Sunday League, but that was the only glimpse you got, and the Gillette Cup. But the actual county championship was never televised.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Harold Larwood. I guess it was similar to that. Obviously the stories, but the amount of footage available for that, his career obviously was very limited. What was it like writing his biography compared to Sobers, and how did you kind of find that process? Was it as enjoyable? Was it a bit tougher, or I guess how did the two compare?
To be honest with you, I think it's all the same. It doesn't really matter to me. I always begin by sorting out all the material that I'm going to need, the news cuttings, the books, because books are made from other books, radio interviews. I'll go down to the British Film Institute, and I've been through their catalogues, and I've tried to source from the kind of BBC what was actually broadcast about a particular person, and it will all sit in the corner of a room for a while, and you look at it, and there might be something like 150 books there. There might be about 4,000 news cuttings. There might be about 25 TV programs you're going to watch, and I guarantee you that with every book you think, I will never do this, I will never get through all this material, and then slowly, as you've done one book or two books, and you've done a few newspaper articles, and you've looked at a few videos, the pile comes down and comes down, and you just hope at the end that it's something readable, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that from my writing, it's always I guess you also get an idea as well when you're writing it. You get a sense of this is good, this isn't as good, and then obviously the rewriting process, and it must be quite an arduous thing going from start to finish. It must take you a long time, I suppose. Most of the books you've written.
Yeah, it does. I mean, the thing is about writing is that you spend most of your time alone in a room. So that when someone asks you, well, what's it like writing? I always think that I usually keep it very, very brief, because I think I'm going to bore them. Because who wants to really hear about a man that's sitting in a room on his own, tapping away on a laptop? Because it's not a terribly exciting period, I suppose. It is a hard slog to write a book. I mean, the book I've got coming out next year, which I'm just about to finish, will be about 130,000 words, and it will have 8,000 words of source notes. So that's taken a fair chunk of kind of time, which is why I'm sure the next one that I do after it will be about 75,000 words.
Yeah. And when it comes to choosing, obviously this is your full-time job now. You used to be obviously a local journalist. is it just kind of going with what you fancy writing about? And I know you've done fiction as well. Do you just kind of go, this is what I want to do? And I guess with your recognition now in the industry, I imagine publishers would be happy to kind of go with what you feel, I suppose. How does that kind of work?
Yeah, I oddly enough, when I had some time yesterday sitting in my hotel room, I before I went to Lord's to do some research, I actually started to think about the next few books that I might want to write and whether I would write them. And I wrote down about 5 titles. And I tend to know when I start how long a book's going to be. And I tend to then know how long it's going to take me to actually write it. But you do find things turn up unexpectedly, or you suddenly have to go and meet somebody, interview somebody, track them down. So it's not a kind of precise process. You've kind of got to just kind of take each day as it comes, really, because like everybody else, you can have bad days at the office when you feel as if you've not really done very well, and then the following day you can fly through 1,000 words.
And is again cricket and football have been the two topics you've kind of written about? Is that kind of where you're still looking at? Is that where your passion still lies?
Yeah, I think so. Mostly. I mean, there are a couple of things that things sort of unexpected things that I might want to kind of write about. There's a particular short book that I want to write, and it will be short. It will only be about 30,000 words, which I might do next. I mean, I might just try and kind of do that before I go on to a next kind of topic. But it's also, I mean, it's very difficult nowadays because non-fiction is having a very difficult time, having a more difficult time than obviously fiction is. And I think in terms of cricket, it's more difficult because the kind of people who like county cricket, test cricket, will kind of read books, but it's very difficult to kind of persuade somebody who's more into the white ball game that they might be interested in somebody like Harold Larwood, for example.
That's interesting. I love the fact that you say 30,000 words is a short book. For me and you, absolutely 30,000 words. Imagine a lot of people listen to this who go, "That's a short book, blimey."
Yeah.
So it made me laugh. So do you just decide I'm writing this and you ask the publishers if they're interested, or do you sense if there's an interest first?
Well, it depends, really, to be honest with you. I always try to write a proposal, but the proposal, my proposals tend usually to be the first kind of chapters or the prologues, because then if the book's accepted, then I've already written 8,000 words of the book. So you always feel as if you're ahead of the curve a little bit. But it really differs. I mean, I think I've only had once where somebody's recommended a book that I should write, and that was a biography of Eric Liddell. And I wasn't sure really whether or not I would be able to write about Eric Liddell, because I didn't know how many people were alive and who actually knew him in the concentration camp where he died in China. But as I did a little bit of preliminary research, I thought, oh, okay, there are quite a few people about. I could go and see them, but it meant going to China, obviously, because I wanted to see the camp. It meant going to New York and Philadelphia, because that's where a couple of people were, and it meant going to Toronto, where his daughters were. And so I did all that, and we got the book done. And it was really a book that was written for the USA. It wasn't really a book written for here, but a British publisher took it on. But it was, it's surprising it got onto the New York Times bestseller list in the US.
Absolutely. Now, obviously, we're recording this a few hours, under 4 hours now, before Nottingham Forest take on Aston Villa, second leg, European semi-final. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this, especially the ones in Nottingham, will be fully aware of that. And your connection with Forest, with Clough, with obviously the European side of things. Do you still follow Forest fortunes, and how does it kind of feel to see them in a European semi-final again?
Well, I mean, it's quite remarkable because when I was watching the first leg, obviously, of the match, and people were talking about Anderlecht and, the last European semi-final, and I remember that game so well because it was it was very sad, really, because everybody talks about the goal that Paul Hart had disallowed right at the end, which was a perfectly legitimate header. But I also remember that Anderlecht were given the worst penalty that I've ever seen when Kenny Swain was supposed to have brought down one of their forwards. I don't think Kenny was in the same postcode as he was at the time.
I've seen the video. It's online. You can find it. It's an absolute shocker.
Yeah, and I remember sitting next to another journalist who was a bit older than me, well, far older than me. So I can only imagine that his eyesight wasn't as. I suppose that his eyesight then was like my eyesight now, basically, Joel. So, and he was adamant that Kenny had kind of brought him down, and he came back to cover Forest the following Saturday. Of course, only 72 hours later. And so I did have to go up to him and say, "Have you seen the replay? Do you still think it was a penalty?" And he didn't. And it was such a shame because, but I do remember, and I've got a photograph of it, that on the day before the semi-final, we all the journalists were sitting in the kind of beer garden of the hotel we were staying in, and BC came over to join us, and we were all having our photograph taken, and we were all drinking far too much beer and things like that. And he was very conscious then. I don't know if he'd had a whisper about it, or whether or not somebody had said you've got to watch the referee, but he was very concerned about the referee.
And obviously, for people who don't know, that it was later revealed that he'd been bribed, hadn't he?
Yes.
To make sure Anderlecht got through. And Forest would have had Spurs would have been in the final.
Yes, it would have been. Yes.
And just like this season, Tottenham aren't weren't the greatest side. Then Forest would have been strong favourites to win, wouldn't they? Third European trophy, and obviously it's a great shame. But I mean, for a lot of people, I guess you probably have the dream job covering Forest under Clough. I mean, looking back at it now, can you almost still believe you had that job and the memories it gave you?
I can't really. I mean, it was an absolute fluke. I was just very, very, very lucky, really. I happened to be in the right spot at the right time, I think. And I don't know why he was so kind of sort of tolerant of me hanging around all the time. I mean, basically, my first job, because I worked for a news agency, which was on Radcliffe Road. And whenever I go down the top of Radcliffe Road now, I always look up at the window, the kind of top window, and kind of think about those days. So it meant that essentially, for me to go down to Nottingham Forest, to get to the City Ground, took literally 2.5 kind of minutes, even if I walk slowly. So I would be there every day, and of course back then I wasn't really a sports writer; I was a sports reporter, because all I was trying to do was to get quotes. I was getting quotes from kind of Brian and Peter Taylor, and I suppose I felt incredibly sort of privileged. And I would go to parties and people would say, "Well, what do you do?" And I would tell them, and I don't think they quite believed me. So, and I couldn't actually quite believe that I was being paid to kind of do this. I always think that that to kind of sit in a kind of press box and to be paid for watching football or sport or cricket or any sport really is just bliss.
Absolutely, and to see those European Cups as well, as it was, I mean, it must be just absolutely thrilling to be part of that. there's those moments of history being made. And I mean, when we did ask for any questions, and someone did say about memorable times at the Evening Post, as it was known then. I mean, are there any that? I know obviously you've written a book about Clough, but anything in particular that stands out, which you kind of still think about a lot today?
Oh, to be honest with you, I mean, it's kind of very difficult to pick out one, because something extraordinary happened on probably every second or third sort of day. It was just the kind of accessibility that you got. I mean, I know that the kind of main doors are still there at the City Ground. So if you walk through the main doors, Brian Clough's office was literally through the next set of doors, which were only 3 or 4 feet away. And you could often know that he was in because you could either hear him on the telephone, or in the later kind of 1980s, when he had his what he always called his kind of gramophone installed in the office, and you would either go in and you would hear either Frank Sinatra or the Ink Spots or someone like that being kind of played. So, and if he was playing that music, you would know he was in a good mood. And so you'd wait for him to come out, and there were 2 chairs sitting in the corridor, and I would occupy one of these chairs, and it became sort of my office, essentially. And somebody would bring me a cup of tea, and I would just wait for him, and then he'd say, come on inside, or walk down to sort of training, or we're going to train on the pitch, just go and sit in the box or something. And it just the pure accessibility of it. I don't think that probably anybody today covering Manchester City is able just to turn up and kind of get half an hour or an hour, or let's go to lunch with Pep Guardiola. But with BC, it was a common thing, really.
And for say younger listeners, maybe don't know Clough as well. I mean, how would you compare him to some of the modern day great football managers? Because his personality. I mean, he used to say Mourinho is not like that. I never bore that. So I just thought Clough was completely unique. I know that's a bit of a oxymoron, but there was no one even close to what he was like as a person, in the way he behaved and acted, and the sort of how amazing it could be one day, how some of his behaviour the next day might be obviously complete opposite. He was just.
Well, he was a massive star. I mean, in those days when everybody wanted to know what Brian Clough thought. He was a panelist on, I think the first panel he went on was probably the 1970 World Cup panel on ITV. He was just, he was a megastar among megastar managers. And I think the big difference with him was, compared to any manager today, is that he didn't only run the team, he actually ran the club. You wouldn't have been able to paint the walls a different colour without asking him. In some cases, if he didn't like where somebody had parked his car, he would ask them to move it, or their car parking space taken away or something like that. He just literally ran everything. Everything had to be run past him.
And did you like him as a person? Do you think he liked you, or can you just not tell, I suppose?
Yeah, I did. I said to somebody, I think it's hard for me to believe, to be honest with you, that Provided You Don't Kiss Me is 19 years old now. But somebody asked me when I was doing quite a few radio interviews when the book came out, did you like him? And I said, oh yeah, of course I did. I said, or it would have been a very different book. I think it would have been a much darker book. And I don't think it's a dark book. It's just basically a book about my kind of life as a provincial football reporter, which is now unlike. I think somebody at the time said it was rather like watching Life on Mars, which was the popular TV program at the time when Provided You Don't Kiss Me came out, and that was set in the 1970s, and the 70s seemed so massively different from the kind of 90s and sort of noughties, and journalism had changed to kind of such an extent that you didn't have the type of access that I got either to him or to any of the kind of players. most of whose kind of telephone number I had, some of whom I played tennis with. It was just it was a simpler life, I suppose, John. That was the thing. It was a simpler and more kind of unstructured kind of week-to-week existence then. There were no kind of Sky News press conferences because there was no Sky News. And the Football Post was selling between 40 and 50,000 copies on a Saturday night because there was no other way to get the football results. And I actually, in saying that, I feel as if I'm 100 years old.
Well, I mean, compared, we're having a quick chat beforehand about journalism and what it is now compared to then. I mean, it feels like it's been 100 years, probably in that sense, the way things have changed. I mean, it's unrecognizable, isn't it? And football's unrecognizable. I mean, do you still enjoy it today, or do you find modern day football sometimes a bit unpalatable? I suppose with the antics and the circus around it.
I think I suppose like everybody, I'm really kind of annoyed by people feigning injury and rolling down on the pitch and protesting to the referee and trying to con the referee and things like that. But the actual football itself is, I think, wonderful. I mean, I love watching the Champions League. And you think of the pitches now, these beautiful pitches. Whereas if you go back and look at the 70s and 80s, the pitches were like ploughed fields. And there was a great excitement too. I mean, remember, Nottingham as a city, because of Nottingham Forest, was such an exciting place to be. For those few years. I remember when they came back with the European Cup in '79, and I was on the balcony of the council house with them as they were parading the cup, and I was standing next to Trevor Francis, and I got to know him reasonably kind of well, and would get to know him even better later on, and we kind of just looked at each other, wondering how we'd kind of got there, I think. And it was kind of more so for me because I remember looking at the photographs of the Forest team which won the cup in '59, and them coming back to the council house, and just looking at the kind of crowds which went all the way back probably to the bottom of Derby Road or somewhere, or the kind of roundabout, and thinking, well, I'll never see that. And then suddenly, Forest are European champions, and all you can see from the kind of balcony of the council house is people with scarves and sheer joy, absolute joy.
Brilliant. And just a couple of final questions. Do you still keep in touch with any of the people, former players, or anyone like that from your time covering the club?
No, I don't really. I saw Peter Shilton not so long ago, and we had a nice kind of and we had a very good chat. I think what happened was that in the kind of end of the 90s, when I came out of sport and went into news, I decided, right, I've got to try to forget about sport now. And for a few years, I didn't follow the game, really. I didn't follow the game. I was very divorced from it. And I also think that Provided You Don't Kiss Me would never have been written had I still been living in Nottingham, because I'd have been too close to it. But because I was in Leeds at the point at which Brian Clough died, and I watched all the obits and I kind of saw all the TV coverage and read all the papers, I could see it all again, but I could see it a little bit clearer. It's like one of those things where if you try to take a photograph of something and you're too kind of close, it will obviously blur. But standing so far back, I could see it, and I thought, yes, I began to realise yet again how fortunate I'd been.
Absolutely, it must have been an incredible job. And one other question we had come in as well is about your sort of local connections in Nottingham from a cricket perspective. That is, so did you play local cricket? I think someone suggested Plumtree was one of your clubs.
Yeah, I played local cricket at Plumtree. I I played football actually for a team called Plumtree Rangers, and had one successful season in which I scored almost 30 goals before Christmas and scored virtually nothing after Christmas. Probably had too much beer at Christmas. I don't know what it was, but I never got my form back, I don't think. But I used to enjoy going to watch both teams. I mean, during my boyhood, I watched both Notts County and I watched Forest. And I still follow every week. I always follow the Forest score, the Notts score, the Mansfield score, and the score from Lincoln City. Always.
Old habits die hard, don't they?
They do, yes. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. This has been a fascinating conversation, and I think your new book on Barry Sobers, I think it's available to pre-order now. Is that correct?
I think it will be, yes. I must confess that I just basically do what publishers tell me. So they will tell me when it's coming out and actually what I've got to go and do for it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time, Duncan. It's been
Pleasure.
a pleasure to speak to you. And thank you to everyone who's listening to this. So this is coming out just before the Forest game tonight. So I read "Provided You Don't Kiss Me" when I was a young boy. I read it twice. It was a fantastic book. So I would urge anyone who hasn't had a chance to read it or has read it to get a copy. And the Harold Larwood book as well was one that I thought was fantastic. And I know, speaking to one of my friends who isn't even a cricket fan, he read it as well. And I told him I was getting you on the podcast. He was very excited. So I'm sure the Sobers book will be equally brilliant. So looking forward to getting a copy of that. And everyone who's listening, so on Monday we have an interview with a cricket analyst coming out as well, which is a fascinating conversation on everything to do with data analysis in cricket, including some of the Notts players who might be potential England players this summer. So do check that out, and we'll be back again very soon. Take care.